welcome back to our very first video for the new set review. Today we're just going to be going over some of the new mechanics, some of the returning mechanics, as well as a new type of card. I guess it's a returning type, but we just haven't seen it in a while, to give you guys an idea of what you can expect going into the Innistrad limited format here in the next week. It comes out in a few days, on Thursday, I believe, right? Thursday the 16th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So you guys on YouTube are seeing this on Monday. I will have one of the colors or two of the color set reviews that Yanks and I will be doing coming up each day after this. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump straight into the introduction here. We're going to kick it off by talking about a very specific mechanic that is returning, but also new. They've changed it around a bit. In the last Innistrad set, we did have a day and night for the werewolf mechanic, but they've changed it around a ton, and I think it's going to be a point of a lot of people getting confused and stuck. So now we've actually changed it so that way there is a game state for the whole entire game for both players. It's not individual anymore. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the day-night game state, and then we'll move on to the day and Nightbound cards.
Yeah, so the main thing, there's a couple things here. Like NerdGirl said, they introduced a new game state where it's either day or night. So if anybody's used to playing with Monarch in either Eternal formats or Commander or a Conspiracy draft, like Monarch, it is neither day or night at the start of the game. Just like Monarch, neither player is the Monarch at the start of the game. But once it becomes day or night, it will be one or the other for the rest of the game. It never goes back to being neither. It is the same for both players. It's a global game state. It's not player specific. So the game can become day or night in two ways. Either a spell specifically says it becomes day or night, or a daybound or nightbound permanent enters play. There are cards, generally werewolves, I believe they're all werewolves, that have daybound and nightbound sides. And so if it is neither day or night when one of those comes into play, most of the time it'll be daybound because the front side of cards are daybound, then it will become day. Now, there's another mechanic we'll talk about later that allows nightbound cards to come into play, but that's how you first become day or night.
So that's the important part about these day or nightbound cards compared to the previous Innistrad, is that, like, if you had one of the werewolves and I had a werewolf, they could be flipping independent of each other based on your spells or your opponent's spells triggering them. But this is completely different in that your cards will be flipping at the same time, which is both kind of helpful because it makes it so that way we're not missing those flip triggers quite as often as we used to, but also it makes it so much more difficult to like manage based on, like, you can't focus your spells in a way that benefits you. Your opponent can just flip the day or night, which makes your character better or worse depending, and you have very little control over that. So alternatively to the daytime session, once you've triggered it by playing one of those cards, we've got the night session here, which is activated by, I'll let you take that, Yanks.
Yeah, so once you get day turned into night, you now, all of your daybound permanents from the battlefield are now nightbound, and any permanents that have day or nightbound when you play them will come in as nightbound, which is actually one of the biggest differences from previous werewolves, is they would always come in on the front side. These will come in on the back or night side if it is night on the battlefield.
It's one of the like strategies to these particular ones as opposed to others. If you have like a stronger backside of your card, you might want to just wait until something else triggers it. Like maybe it's less susceptible to removal or whatever the case may be. But there is some strategy among like when you play your cards based on the overall game state or board state.
Oh, absolutely. And if you look at the bottom, the last part of this night token, it looks similar to your old transform condition, right? Cast 2 spells during their own turn, but it's only one player. It's the active player. Just
yes.
Kind of like the day side only cares about the active player.
That was the thing about the old card, is like if you didn't want to flip your cards, you could only cast the one spell, but if your opponent had an instant, then they could also make it flip that way because it was 2 cumulative spells, whereas this is only active player for both sides of the card.
Exactly. It gives you a lot more control over being able to, flip your. It gives you a lot more control on being able to flip your permanents. However, it also gives your opponent a lot more freedom to play things at instant speed without having to worry about this.
Definitely.
So it kind of affects both sides. So, like we said, daybound and nightbound permanents. Believe in this set, they're all werewolves, and all the werewolves are daybound on the front side, nightbound on the back side.
Yes, so those will be your flip modal cards. If you guys draft these in paper, keep in mind that they can see the backside of your card. So drafting these flip cards are always like, it does give your opponents some information when you're at a live paper table. But on Arena, we shouldn't have that problem. So let's go ahead, now that we've looked at the night and day, let's take a look at an actual card with Nightbound or Daybound. Bird Admirer. This is a Daybound card, so when you cast this, it's going to be flipped in the front unless it's already been activated and changed to night. If there is no day or night when this is cast, it automatically is going to start with the Daybound counter for the game state. So this is a 1/4 reach for 3, which is already decent stats. And then it is just the Daybound. So once it switches to night, you're going to see a different side of the card. It is then going to turn into a 3/5 reach Nightbound Werewolf.
The real interesting thing on this card, right, is that no matter what, if it's day or night in play, when you cast it, you are paying 2 and a green, and it is the front side of the card, the Bird Admirer on the stack. And then if it resolves, when it enters the battlefield, it just enters as one side or the other, depending on what the game state is.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing, I think, about this particular day Nightbound cycle. Like modal cards or something, when you cast them, you're casting them for the flip cost on the other side of the card. So if you have a card that has some sort of like mana leak effect that you have to like pay something to counter them, it's always going to be that front CMC. Now, one of the things that can change because there is no backside CMC is like what happens if you have a lockdown enchantment that or a cheap black removal that removes something based on CMC cost.
What do you mean by that?
So if you have a card that says destroy something that costs 3 CMC or less, or 2 CMC or less. So is it going to count because the actual werewolf side has no cost? Is that similar to a token, or is it going to count for the backside mana cost?
So it's interesting. The old rules for these cards used to be that Wing Shredder, for example, has no converted mana cost, like a token.
Yes.
It's 0. But a few sets ago, and I forget exactly when, they changed it so that these backsides have the same CMC as the front side.
Interesting. I'm wondering why they wouldn't make that note somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, that's, so like, your example of destroy target creature with CMC 2 or less will work on both sides of this card. I know they changed it because of some weird interactions.
It won't work on this card. It won't work on either side.
I'm sorry, yes,
CMC or less. Yes. Yeah, it won't work on either side. Whereas the situation previously would have worked on the front side, but not on the Nightbound side.
Correct. I know they changed it due to some weird interactions with other mechanics like Cascade and things like that.
All right, guys. So if you guys are triggering these different sides, make sure if you're playing this in paper that you are just keeping track of your game state, especially if you guys do any like more REL type tournaments, because not flipping during these game state actions could definitely like result in some warnings.
Agreed. And that's why I'm glad they printed that token to make it fairly obvious on the battlefield what it is.
Definitely. I hope it's a double-sided token. I don't have to carry around 2.
It is, in fact, a double-sided token.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on, guys. I picked a little bit of a fancier card for this. We are going to be talking about Coven, which is one of the new mechanics as well. This is a new version of Sigarda, which I'm not sure if I said that right. Sigarda, whatever, is got a similar feel to Winota, but less busted, but more scary on her own. So let's go ahead and take a look at Coven.
Yeah, so Coven for this card, and for all cards, basically, is if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. The wording on that is a little weird, but it literally just means power in terms of power and toughness.
Attack power, yeah. It doesn't mean 3 different Coven abilities, which would be actually really freaking sweet if you get to like assemble some sort of like X-Men team that does a bunch of sweet stuff, but that's way too complicated. So we're just going to say like 2 power, 3 power, and Sigarda herself, which is 4 power.
Yeah, so the way that becomes tricky is things like pump spells could change whether or not you actually have Coven.
That's
or
true.
minus X effects. Counters. So you might have Coven one turn and might have it one phase and then not have it the next phase because someone gives something -3, -0, or
yeah, definitely.
It makes those type of cards, those like typically blue -4, -0, -2, -0 type effects, a little bit more interesting in this set because of the way they can manipulate Coven abilities.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't done, looked at the entire set yet, but Coven is basically a unique ability to the card that triggers Coven always triggers if you have the 3 different powers on your 3 creatures, but the actual Coven ability that the card possesses is something unique to the card. Is that correct?
Correct. Coven is an ability word that is just referencing the condition that you have to meet.
Yes. So this one is pretty powerful. It's going to be getting a creature from your library and putting it into your hand, not just any creature. It's like look at the top however many and get a specific to a human type deal. So similar to Winona, but just doesn't like kill your opponent instantly, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, a much friendlier version of Winona for everybody else at least.
Yeah, I mean it still is a 4/4 Thrampler, which is scary. That's some scary shit. So still definitely a force to be reckoned with for 4 mana. Jiminy Christmas.
Oh yeah, great card, mythic power, and it's hinting a little bit at a human's theme for green-white, which was what you had in the very original Innistrad. Green-white was a human tribal pair, so.
I mean, that definitely makes sense, because you have, like, the vampires and the werewolves. What else can there be for the other 2 or 3 colors?
Yeah, I think the original Innistrad, you had vampires in black-red, you had werewolves in red-green, you had zombies in blue-black, and you had spirits in blue-white, and then green-white was humans.
Humans, yeah. Definitely similar vibes here. We're seeing all of those mechanics with also, like, mini lords as well that you'll see when we get to the set review tomorrow. All right, so now we've talked about Coven. Let's go ahead and talk about the last new mechanic, guys, and that is Decayed. Decayed is a new type of token mostly. I mean, I think some creatures can come back with like maybe a Decayed counter on them. And what that basically means is when it attacks or blocks, you sacrifice it at the end of the combat. So they are like kind of one-time use creatures. And why I find this to be pretty unique is we can get a lot more fun interactions that pump out a lot more tokens, but because they are one-time uses, it's not super powerful.
Yeah, they're one-time creatures that can only basically attack or be used as sacrifice fodder because they don't block.
Yep.
But they do sacrifice at the end of combat, so you can't get an attack in and then use any sort of sorcery speed sacrifice effect later in the turn.
No, if you were, it'd have to be like a Village Rites on the stack, like after blocks, right?
Exactly. They're good for Morbid, which is not a keyword in this set, but was in the original Innistrad. And
yep.
When something dies this turn, this happens, which shows up on some cards in this set. Like you said, the vast majority of these are showing up on 2/2 zombie tokens. But there are some cards that do some other things with Decayed as well.
Yeah, I picked this one. It was pretty interesting. Again, we'll get a little bit more to it in the set review, but it does say if you have no creatures with Decayed, create one, and then you can kind of just sit on that forever. So it kind of allows you to get like a free chump blocker every turn, or just a free mini attacker each turn. So whether you're throwing it away or what, it's a pretty interesting mechanic that I think is going to make for some really cool limited gameplay.
Well, free attacker, because it still can't block.
Ah, stop.
Now, Jadar here should remind a lot of people of Ophiomancer, which is a cube card that shows up a lot that does the same thing with snake tokens. Like, if you don't have a snake token, make one.
All right. What's the over under how many times I'm going to think this thing can block for like the next 12 hours? Like at least 4 more times.
Somewhere around there.
And then I'll probably get it remembered. When you first read something, like it gets stuck in your head that way, and then it takes forever to like fix it.
Sure. Disturb is another mechanic that's only going to appear on double face cards. And what it does is it allows you to play the card from your graveyard for its disturb cost, but you get the backside of the card. So the card we're seeing here, Beloved Beggar, it's 1 and white for an 0/4. But then if it's in your graveyard, you could play it for 4 white, and you'll get the backside of the card, which in this case...
So real quick, I just want to say, like, the front side is usually not going to necessarily be worth its, like, mana cost on its own. So, you're, like, they're going to have some synergies with sack outlets, or you just want to chump this off. So that way you can get to the backside, which is kind of a house. Sometimes it's, like, a fine creature, like a 1/1 or something. And then later in the game, you can cast it for that cost and bring in something that's usually a lot more powerful. And again, one of those situations where your opponent might forget that it's in your graveyard, which is always helpful.
Yeah, so in this case, you get the backside, you get pay 6 mana, and you get a 4/4 Flying Vigilance, which is, pretty good limited card.
That's going to win games for sure.
It's, in a way, it's kind of like Flashback for creatures, because you get a second use out of your graveyard. Now you get a different effect, where Flashback you generally get the same effect, but it's a way to get basically 2 cards for 1, but also you can use this if you have, like you said, sacrifice outlets, or if you have some sort of mill, or if your opponent's milling you and this gets in your graveyard in some other fashion, discard.
Ooh, disturbed
like
self-mill sounds spicy. I like it. One of the things I think is really cool flavor-wise, guys, is that that things come back oftentimes stronger than when they died. So it's sort of like the idea of you kill someone and then they come back and haunt you and they become an actual problem, whereas originally they weren't really a problem or something. So it just seems pretty flavorful and neat to me.
One thing that is interesting about the Disturbed cards is that I believe, and I haven't looked at every single one of them, but everyone I have looked at has flying on the backside because they're all spirits.
Yes. Another thing to note with these Disturbed cards is that they exile at the end of, when they leave the battlefield again, they get exiled as opposed to going into the graveyard. So that way they aren't going to be getting to come back over and over again, similar to a flashback card, which was the comparison that Yanks made a minute ago. So it's basically the exact same mechanic, just on a creature.
Yep, and just to note, we talked about Daybound and Nightbound, these are more transform cards, but they don't have that day or night bound ability. So they're not tied to that day or night game state.
Yep, those cards will only actually have day or night on the card themselves. So we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of the mechanics that are returning that we've seen throughout Magic's history, but are not necessarily evergreen and things we see very often. So I went ahead and picked a, sort of straightforward card, but this has Flashbacks. So if you guys are new to Magic, this is not something you see super often, but what Flashback is just allows you to cast your card a second time from the graveyard. And then it gets exiled from there, but it's basically a two-use type of card. And where you see that, that seems super powerful, but often these cards are a little bit weaker than they typically might be, similar to this card, which is same casting cost as a Lightning Helix, but Lightning Helix deals and gains 3. So it is a little bit of a meet in the middle type of an ability.
Yeah, lets you get 2 uses out of a card. It's a mechanic we've seen before a couple times. Started in Odyssey, we came back in Innistrad. We've even seen it a few times, but it's a perfect fit for sort of the graveyard theme that you get with Innistrad sometimes, and just always a good solid mechanic that players seem to enjoy. So I'm not surprised to see it back here.
Definitely. I will say 6 mana sounds like a lot for this mechanic, and a lot of players might think to themselves, oh, it's never going to be worth it. But it is kind of a free ability. It's like an extra card or a half a card late in the game. And a nice thing about these flashback mechanics, especially on Arena, when players are just kind of going through the motions much quicker, is that they're going to forget that they're in your graveyard, and you're just going to get to just surprise them with these things. In paper Magic, people are kind of shady and they'll hide their shit, but in this, you have to actually go out of your way to click on their graveyard and scroll through it. And that's not always going to be something that people notice, especially if you cast this on their 2-drop, and then wait 15 turns and then you just get them, which is always really nice.
Yeah, especially any flashback card that you would just play without the flashback. Is Lightning Helix better? Sure, but I'm still playing this card without flashback. So flashback's just a really nice bonus. Yeah,
definitely. You're right. Helix is better, but I'm still playing this card even if it doesn't have the flashback text, so it's just fine. All right. So another returning mechanic that we have is Investigate. This is something we've seen in the past, which just gives you a clue token, which lets you draw a card. So this is the Briar Bridge Tracker. It's a decent creature on its own. It's a 3-mana 2/3 with Vigilance. And as long as you control a token, it gets +2/+0, and that includes your clue token, which is cool. When it enters the battlefield, you investigate. Create a colorless clue artifact token with pay 2 mana, sacrifice it, draw a card. These are clue tokens you will find in the actual packs themselves, just like you would a wolf token. But on Arena, they'll just generate for you automatically.
Yeah, everybody loves, the reason they keep coming back to Innistrad is people love the flavor of Innistrad, but they've also done a very good job with mechanics that people really like in the Innistrad sets. So you've seen things like Flashback coming back from original Innistrad, and the werewolf themes, and the sort of similar tribal themes. Investigate originated in Shadows over Innistrad, and it's been a mechanic that they've really liked and have been using repeatedly, not in every set, but more often. So, this card kind of harkens back to Tireless Tracker a little bit. People are comparing it to that. Tyrus Tracker is much better because it can get out of control. But you get a 3-mana 2/3 that can be a 4/3 and replaces itself. That seems pretty good.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about the token is that even if this thing just immediately gets killed or something, like it still does get you that card over time, which is pretty interesting. I do know that there are cards also that let you give your opponents clue tokens as some sort of like negative to counteract how powerful a card might be. I believe I saw like a removal spell in white that just kills anything but gives them a clue token. So similar to some of the exile, but your opponent draws a card type of spells, it does that. So it kind of... it's a really powerful removal spell in white, which is kind of a no-no. So then they kind of like counteract it with that clue. So definitely an interesting thing that allows them to balance cards by either making weaker cards stronger with a clue or by making overly powerful cards have that bonus for your opponent. So it allows them to play, I think, with the power levels a lot more than they usually do. So I think this is a really interesting mechanic that I'm happy to see come back.
Agreed. It lets you... It's card drawing, but delayed. It costs mana, so there's a lot of tools they can use in that to balance it.
Definitely. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Oh, this is kind of a 2-for-1. We could have doubled up on this one. My bad. So this is a returning mechanic again that we see from time to time. It's getting more and more common. It's pretty much, I think, evergreen at this point, and that is the ward mechanic, which is just your opponent can't like target it unless they pay the additional mana cost. It's kind of like a built-in counterspell to protect your creature. This one also has Disturbed, so it's harder to kill, and then once they do eventually kill it, it comes back as another creature, like we talked about before.
Yeah, Ward's been around since at least the Titan cycle. It was often referred to as the Frost Titan ability, but it got keyworded in Strixhaven, and they're just continuing to use it so far in every set since, and I believe it's there to stay.
Yeah.
Because it's another way you can just balance creatures. Changing the power toughness of this thing might be too much, to make it too good, too bad. Well, maybe we can give it a protection ability.
Yeah. And another thing too is like, I think that it is coming in very slowly. We're seeing it on like 1 or 2 cards a set mostly. Like in the last D&D set, it was like on the Worm and on the Paladin and on the one of the Plate Mails or something. So, but that was kind of it. So it's not like this overwhelming mechanic that's showing up as an entire archetype to make your opponents just hate their life for an entire game. It's just like this nice little bonus that is added to a couple of things that can maybe sometimes, set your opponent a little off balance with their removal, which is kind of nice.
All I have to say is if it means fewer cards with hexproof, that makes me happy.
Yeah, hexproof is kind of lame for sure. All right, so I think one of the last cards we're going to talk about is a returning card type, and that is a Aura Curse. This is actually an enchantment that gets cast on an opponent, not on their creature, and there's no really way for them to shake it off unless it gets removed or blown up in some way. I believe there's only 5 of these, which I could be mistaken on. I have to read the set in its entirety, but there's a rare cycle of them, 1 in each color. So like I said, we will be going over these cards and rating them in the videos starting tomorrow. But what do you think of this type of card as they are?
It's another fan favorite type of card coming, or again, from original Innistrad that they've used a few times. Mostly in Innistrad, but we saw them in Amonkhet block as well. I think they're fun. They generally, with a couple exceptions, haven't been great in limited, but it's a hard card type to interact with. Enchantments usually are, so if you get one that's good, it can be very good.
Yeah, especially I think they're going to be slightly better than they were possibly in paper, because you're never really playing best of 1 in paper. So in best of 1, you're not likely to have as much like enchantment removal in your main deck. So cards like these can just kind of catch your opponent off guard and sneak in some good wins. If I remember correctly, the Innistrad one that did win a lot of games was like anytime your opponent casts a creature or whenever something enters the battlefield under their control, creature-wise, they like lose a life. So it kind of made them put themselves on a clock.
That was a very good, that was definitely the best, at least non-rare mythic curse in Amonkhet.
Okay, it was Amonkhet. I wasn't sure if it was Innistrad or Amonkhet. Like, they all blur together at this point.
Yeah. Interestingly, looking at the set, it does not appear that there is a green curse.
Okay, so maybe a cycle of 4 then?
Yeah.
Okay. Whether or not they're good, we're going to have to find out tomorrow. But overall, I think that the curses are really fun. Get some sideboard enchantment removal. It's gonna help you.
Yeah. Yeah, curses are again, we're talking about 4 rare, so we're not going to see them a ton in limited, but because of that, they might be able to steal some games because no one's expecting them.
Yeah, sort of like a teleportation circle type deal where it's like you don't see them very often, but they can definitely steal some games. All
Plus,
right.
Somebody might just lose to that card on the screen because the art's really creepy and it freaks them out.
Ooh, yeah. Honestly, this has some of the creepiest art I've seen in a while. There was like that butcher card with a hand that hangs. It's gross.
Oh, the meat hook massacre.
So I'm looking forward to the rest of our set reviews to like talk about a little bit of the art or notice it at least. All right,
Agreed.
So that is the introduction to the new Innistrad set, guys. There is the day and night board states, then there's the night and day bound cards, Coven, Decayed, Ward, Flashback, Investigate, Disturbed, and the new curse cards. So quite a lot to take in. Let me know what you guys think of the new mechanics and some of the returning ones. What do you think that they should have added or done differently? And yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys. I'd like to give a special thank you to those of you who have signed up for our Patreon. I couldn't make this content without you. Also to Cool Stuff Inc. and KMC Sleeves for supporting the channel as well. Definitely check them out and use our discount codes to support the channel.